Chapter 2. God came, did nothing, changed nothing, took nothing, and gave nothing, as if he'd always been here, never left, never did, and never would again. And yet he was already gone, so that no emotion and no hubris of creature could catch him, no arrogance and no echo of rage and no lash out from the earth. We are traveling through time. We were, and we are right now, but we were fired from the speed of light long ago, to where we've slowed, coagulated, conglomerated in our breeding deltas, with our trudging, massed convergences, our keeps, carrying our flesh and ownings and memories, our binds and insights, bereavements, inladen instincts, instructs, perceptions and precepts, our blood and sakes and materials, items and skins and scars and portions. What we own is what we owe. No coding can release us from the instant of white-hot eternity, or the revolving of our procrastinations, our play to shy and shirk and hide and harrow away, and around the truth and the end, the center at the all-being, unmoving. No influx can save us from our embalming as royalties, our committal to the ground. No purpose pays the debt we've given to others, escapes and measures, servants and slaves, forgiven cuts from monsters, parings from overgrowths, abominated, unchosen broods for ourselves, tracks, trails back to the injustices, tastes and desires and not to the one. Some, and many, die and suffer, closed eyes shut before they are opened so that they may live and love, and you'll die for them or by their ferocities, young and childish, and sprouted and aged, so that they may live again as well, filling the empty remnants of the centuries of silence, the bending, bowling eon of formation, the bays of ebbing rape and relishment, the famine and desiccation of clean, fallow harvest, drooling failure barren. They swarm the land, leave the crops consumed and sterile. "Leave my brother out of this," screamed God when he was put to trial. Desolation, consumed, militant tribunal, the surpassed ritual of hindsight, discontent, guesses of the content. "These are beyond the beliefs of all your dreams," he was told, sentenced, and convicted. The Lord is, and always has been, the prisoner, our prisoner. So he said, led from the court by chains, cast to the foot of the hallway, the street, and the cell, links clinking and jingling onto the floor as the devil thinks, waking from sleep called black, astute, restless, heat and sweat and ridden exhaustion, "Why are all my stars falling out?" If there were others, on other planets, they'd be much like us. You'd as soon cut across the lines of all thought to land first on their planet as you would die, go to hell, and find that they'd greet you at the entrance, point you to a table with varieties of tools, vices, clips, blades and loppers and pliers, torturers' equipments, and find the attendants telling you to go ahead and start. Get to work, cutting up all those people while they're still breathing in any of the other rooms, and you would already hear the screaming. They'd look at you like, why'd you expect anything but your old job back when you returned home? And that you'd have no right or reason to expect anything better. The sound deafens as drilling creaks of pain that don't end, shocks of separation of body bits that endure eternal, and man above machine and animal alike, ambience that drones down to its purpose, distinguished from the resistances and shuddering wriggles of the already, too soon, too stubborn, living unconscious. You might remember, with trudging dismay and excitement at prospects of comfort, of pleasure, that no one of family or friends in hell do anything on the weekends or with free time because everyone enjoys their careers so much, searing all that flesh and punishing it, pulling it apart, their turn for hours and hours that seem to consume every efficient, useful moment of each of their lives. Call it agony. Call it desolation. destitute. Let them devour the field so we may quicker bask in the desert, like a beach for the water to take a break from growth, when water wishes to drain away and split, cleaner and cleaner, and always to the inanimate, always washing from itself and salt and sand the relics of the black and purple parasite. You'd drink the fresh, hot diamond, flowing, poured from the spigot on the core, chewing chips of silver and gold and jewels, edible as treasure is when it's true, when it's good and held high like in the kitchens of the castle. And if there were people on other planets, orbiting other universes across all the random genetic design, they'd be so much like us they'd row boats across the water, pools of mercury or magma, or any other confluence with no use or memory of carbon, stare up out of the forests, chase papers and short loves in the valleys, hide nothing but their souls in the mountains, and you'd wonder why you left. You would wonder how you'd traveled so far for such the same, or how to find that love of yours there again. And you would wonder if you might have passed their ship on the way, hadn't been looking out the right window at the right moment of lazy, hibernating, floating days without gravity on interstellar winds, and how you'd broken the speed of light and traveled through time that way, when time was and always was behind you, trailing, waiting for you to escape it. You might find yourself there first, living much the same life, grown as much to fit the suitable as the environment, to fashion the elements and life springs with many the same or very similar others, and you'd destroyed on the home ground only because it's you that knows all are destroyed at the apocalypse. You stand in that place and watch your new chance unfold, and there might be but one variation on the crack of the tip of a bundle, on a branch that you passed in walking, hanging over one path in all the world, and gave you thought, if not notice. Your distance from younger rebirth, your minuscule deviations in all of creation, from the start, not from beside and beyond, and you might have to try again. There are other planets. It is not that there might be. It's just the first time they've seen the devil pressed up against the glass. Growth like refracted color gone from dew, from misty, precipitative levitation to leaf like being when its flourishment has always been unreal, the stalk of pure light, crisp and cellulose, a ghost born to the selective experimentation of the structurous greenhouse. They coil him down to the dwindling dirt so that he must bake and breathe again from the humid floor. The passing of the new sun, brief in eternity, in wet, storming season, does not let him forget he's there. He exists. God tells the devil, as he does, communes in that blare of heat, day and night, that constant burning ash of air, smoke, and mud. Now that you've grasped and taken the knowledge of the higher law, faith, you must release the lesser law of justice. God says, do not worry for tomorrow, or fear for it, for each day, that day, has its own providences, its own preparations and obstacles, hurdles anew for hunger satiated, desires fed, cups of my filling presence that runneth over. Chaos, loving, embracing progression, propagation abundant, but the devil knows that if you keep ignoring the crag, developing deep, the hole digging out in decay, underswell, sinking pockets of ground, if you keep thinking of today alone, you live for nothing but that which is already lost. You'd forget the necessities of tomorrow. You'd find levities compounded, wells cooked to the muck and grime, buckets molden and broken at the basin, ropes of strength and pulleys untethered, frayed and twisted, and harboring dust flicked to the single measured drop of slow, still waters in the soulless, cylindrical tranquility beneath, reaching toward the abyss as it is when a place has been found benevolent, a failure, a greed of the serene, a caveat and contempt of its release, its instilled resistance, inherent cherishment concealed, cloaked, fields above gone dry, and out and off and frozen and climbing and vining and natural, and soon you'd have no regard for tomorrow, no awareness, no understanding, so much so that you've lost this day itself from pasts as moons,
as mornings, as seasons and generations. Histories already endured, allocated, or any further anointed as you defy the recompense, revenge, return, remunerations, captured vigilance, righteous in reprisal, the template of man, animal, inanimate, or texture, balance the deserved and reserved. The cost of entering the oasis from the beginning, the clipped, defeated karma, the trickery of amendments atoned, broods in greater health, a more permanent, rigid, unforgiving youth, deeper in fresh suffering and longer in years, punishment and penance for the prophesied, stock in oil in the future, praise and worship affected, flowering, scraped hardest, stripped most raw, brought together in untamed spirit, delight infallible, unearned, termed in commitment, reverence compensated, dispersed, stepped into joy, requited, owed, ill favor sought and found, stoic privilege revoked, rights against all non-existent. The path of the Creator, surrounding, enervating at its end in this flesh, and wood, and metal, and rock attending, containing, contained, and made from the same one, the same being, and so the one way, and many ways, and every way, to stay with the Lord rather than to leave Him or His presence. Impossible, the energy, obedient. And you'd have no fuel or fortune but to remain, to live without the hunts of death, if this is the afterlife, the dreams of fabricated horrors washed clean without awakening until bid, until gambled, drawn, dealt, entrusted, bet and played, without the benefits of responsibility, the stresses of escape, the propulsions of predestination, and the chase of the ever-purifying, draining resurrection, naked, unsheltered, unscarred, open to the wide sky, empty, fetal territory of sulking, bowing, kneeling, crawling trespass, possessed with preventative possession, tangled, knotted, sore, and rigid in ascetic exertion, soft and famished, plagued with leeching demons, babbling, goading, compelling, inciting, provoking, and tempting, wanting, needing, promised to the helpless, the meek, the meager, poised and poisoned and positioned for the massless deliverance, resolved, confirmed, guiltless, indulging in the sight of the beckoning transcendence, offset, angled, bending, innocent, irreparable, full and fated, gratified on gravity, risen with convictionless revolution, saved with nothing kept, nothing protected, preserved with change unchosen, prized in poverty, wallowing and waiting behind insufficiency, inviolable survival, suffering, violent viability, feral yearning, holy wilderness, denying, abiding, slaving, slaying, starving. God worships Himself, as He must, if all suppose to lend for forgiveness, for chastity, and in His limitless, endless penitence, He does nothing else, nothing but, and nothing more or further, or better, or greater, than praising Himself, Himself alone. The devil calls it arrogance and mindlessness for the followers, because the followed are turned to the above, self-esteemed instead of selfless, celebrated, soul, royalty congregated. He calls it hypocrisy, a heretic at the highest authority, and if there are others on other planets, you may meet them on the way, in trajectory, shuttling off to other aims, other promising terraria to be reaped, looking for people like themselves at another timeless destination from another blinded viewpoint. You may come to them, a lone and small ship of blue, as focused and compact as an escape pod or a satellite, drafted under their wake, spun and looped under and around their colliding arc, graced with ease in the respect of metal against metal, sensitive to the frantic electric opera, gusted and dragged on the mass and faith and resolution of their other galaxy. Recalculate the distance, the curves. Order a shift and pressure against the boom of the jet stream, the chamber of void filling even in nothing, trailing between nowhere. Split off the nose of their giant, colossal, orange transport, a sustaining orbital colony, catapulted, behemoth, more trusting with the risk and weight of its payload where, inside, their breeds and youths grow bent from awaking to open stellar atmosphere beyond the canopy, the planes in division across their recreation at their feet, the buildings of their works and their studies, their comforts and warm hearths, procreating in the more generous limitation the mimic fields of their play, turf, and sidewalk, natural, normal, and valued now as all that ever has been, all that ever was, to placate the yawning longing, waiting either for our arrival or it would be our departure, and the arrival of God for our stillness, thus, and then to move on, but one or the other. Their kinds are as many and as varied as the people that change and form out from across these lands, terrain that span, curdle, ramble, and collapse and run, levy and roll. They are, again, as far apart from each other as universes, in understandings and every experience, and even further, and they find the same self that they must define and relate, reflect to the many mirrors, windows, and view decks, above and belevelled, though what great references they take from passing spheres, bright and tumultuous conglomerations and scapes, and concentrated galaxies that they never touch but with their representative senses, their sights, their scents and sounds and visions. Permeation so far from the reach of memory of our origins or spirits alike, and in a reservation held far from man, incomplete, unfinished, lifeless, and bearing and turning to the hand of power, to the carve of the sleeping mold, so they let those places touch to them their personal realities, unshifted, unstirred, unmoved, unreaching, instead. Steady the mast, tune the cable and fixture, arm and antenna, organize the echo and relay of the towering blip to put a click to soundlessness, positioning the rafter to laugh at the dark, steeple and nod in the highest outer temples unaware. Scratch and growl into the radio, roar the alarm, remember, you're safe already. Align the dynamics against the coal of the waves, map the layered planes of shifting constellations, muscling and comforting for place and constant break of dimensions, always bending off and away and over left and right and color, leap and throttle and deject and determine the new markers for the route, snipping the horizons on the adjusted path, if you're not already thrown too far off course to ride still to those detours, their oblivious physics, anomalies, and around their crevices to the same planned objective. We made this earth, from hill to treacherous core, plate to jutting mountain, ocean to clear sky, to foliate and let us breathe, and drink and mate, immortal before first mortality, to carry us through space with stable atmosphere. We're traveling space now as well as time, flying, launched, visitors or fleeing prodigies revisited, charged or banished with preservation of the species, on our own functional, deployable ship, sailing, collecting, compounding physical, coalesced, carpeted with connectability, granted essential, delineated and pliant, co-relatable to any limber, resilient, latticed, solid introduction or uncooperating competence. Battle stations buried on the surface, inactive, entrenched. A hell for warriors where the battle is to hide from the destructive light burning through us all. The river of fire as wide as the dry desert on either of its sides, where none carry their weapons anymore because not one has ever crossed the no-man's land and had the water or the will, at the loss and confusion of the direct dispatchment, to fight. Shucked of all carryings and dyadic courage, incubated internal nurturing endowments stripped and peeled out from the parched root in the chaotic boarding mirage, ghosts and eels of their own accumulated flesh and insignia, drapes of adornments and telekinetic transmissions made into motion, influences harmonizing the soul to the body, incontinuous, entwining, symbiotic, mutual and ferocious, fusing invigorating gains onto our decks and to bust the doors down into our hull. We swing out on ropes and don't let go, and swing back against the rusted hooks and dirt and moss and rough rock of the cliffside, to crawl beneath, to stretch the clefts and caves of the underswell, to pick out the basement on our own height, the pendulum of our own balance, as deep into these mausoleums as tombs and as the numbers of spirits we'd like to tap, to harbor temporal, to give chance at the kind, collaborative, carnal, weaker, or more tired, battered souls that need more of the darkness to remain lost, to nurse and cure the nightmares of the eternal death, to wander and strive and cower in the shade, to prepare without ambition to feast and learn, to enjoy the intensity of the present and still have the way to step toward and into the proximities of the light, and feel real, recognize that they are alive, able, free, and important to encompass the passing of the barrens, and guided still, even if before time they do not wish to be. We made every gravel and highway of this place to match and meld and mitigate at the source. There is no reason we are not the hive mind, with subsense needs released, imposed, engaged, involved, and no excuse. Pass a green pod on another convex, and wonder if there is any stirring aboard or extinction of material, drifting, too short to recover or communicate, too coincidental to capture, curious, too abrasive to predict, too fast to succeed, predating and endurant, just to contemplate and caress, collate, curate the blessing to the faces unseen, if hiding or hallowing ahead, inattentive to outcroppings of the expanding, brazen past. Reach your infinity, when infinity has never meant no end in sight, but no end. You may wish to stay in tandem with the tremendous stargazers you intersect, but you do not have the resources to drag their tangent to both your nurturing, supported conquests, populated, profitable, ripe. You'd mine and loot all of the riches on vacant asteroids and moons, bring them back to a home where they were only worth exchange because they were rare, limited, and gorgeous in their vestigial vanity. And you would have to find true use for those minerals, continue to find functional, belaboring manners to support life with your plunders, and then you'd realize that, with all of your powers of excavation, transport, and supply, you completed a sole mission of shifting shimmers and sheens to covet glory already hidden, and in your best pursuits of wealth beyond population, your one lasting effect was disturbing the swinging balance and rhythm of your entire wayward galaxy. The devil prays to God for continued silence, for victory if opportunity is always treason. If there is no reason why, why? The signs don't say, "Believe me," anymore. They say, "Don't believe yourself." Radical upsurges of life flow and caw, and call their presence and their flock from the spring, shivering ice in the sliver that gets them an upstart to take off from the ground. If they don't know from where or why, wind for wet wings, a glassy beckoning from the mountain ridges behind with a promise. If you go further, you find water, and if you go further, you find food, and if you go further, you find matings, and you live again, reborn to other grazings. A kick of liquid silver for blood more matching and made from the temperature of the beneath, a formation and a line of them, a host, a horde, a genus of that womb and its shadows. What would you learn if you met these space trotters out in the cosmos, before you landed upon them and their territory, a plentiful distance, and what would you still bring back if you followed? Shuttles of the Ark swim upstream to brighter, more star-populated universes, if not much bigger, but thinner or broader strips of plain, sparser in the neck and glide of its ripples, not even considered flesh by those with the dragging digital nets upon the great marble work, for their eyelessness, for the random soul they hide inside, self-preserved. No other life sees your life as life, just landscape whipped into action, the inanimate animated by the wind or the forces of unending desire, the constant, pointless, thus spinning struggle. So believe spiders, venomous when they are predatorial, laying out their strings in moments of echoing, paralyzing infinity or karmic torture, suck from the wriggling, disregarding the waving hand and the drooping branch for the drink of the juice, the leap of the levity to prove that we are alike to those we would find on other worlds or those concealed from us in passing, gaseous entities, textured, patterned, moving planets of beings that we may never know in their purposes, their prophecies and revelations, as their plans come to a purposed shore, still breathing and beating under this burning light, or this soothing poison, this muted forest dust, or the wash of the ocean desert of Father Time as their conflicts come to actions, unabided, unannounced, unfocused, like they're made from the specifics and staples of the land from which they are risen, like all life as spirit and body are God's. And that eon, that age of specific ancients, inherent comparisons, that era of civilized deities grown voracious on the dark side of their own planet, undulating their measures for the pleasure of the watching Creator, or all mind if we do not see them, and they are not unaware enough to be looking up at daylight, eternity, to catch a glimpse of us, and rescind the great drama of the fiery, bleeding plague. We may not meet until we land on that suitable planet, the right conditions, the basking nature gone to seed, the spaces taught to bend around time for the rising, the hillsides threshed to mattresses at our sliding shoulders, the bake of the sky, even and open, indirect, lashing around our eyes and our bodies, and the cliffs of our homes unsheltered, rubies and diamonds and emeralds for rooftops to taste to each owner, fresh water rinsing down flushed and endless through every crevice and corner, to wash constant the plumbing evil from our puffing skin, impediments vanquished, mountains leveled, lessers rotted, buried, death beneath our color on the free trail, rocky. Could we not step into the same contentions as we cross between our own castles on this terrain and to others? Can we still not recognize that they all pursue those same hospitalities, or, as nature, nurtured, already born closer on banks of those springs? Isn't it romantic, as true as possible and pleasant, and normal and inescapable, that in all that sharp space, in all its permutations and its infinite genetic span, its random design, or its practiced, steady, sure, torrential hand, to think, to imagine, to understand, and to believe, to know also that there may be, out here, in this particular span, this feasible fostering of dimension, this realistic semblance of scarcity, specific to each kind of life, nothing, no one but us? If there are, it could not allow you to cower from your choices here, for it to be here, and how far. It does not allow you to let your perfect temptress slip, your lucky fun carry you away if you'd go forever, not without reminding you that she's there. Shouldn't it also bring us closer to know that the one you want is right here? Or as far across as infinity, next, nearer, textured statues that strive and shift, and move and reach after they are carved, gods for goddesses, goddesses for guards, anti-chaotic, and that it brushes us still together for all the sounds and the smells and the screams and the joys of the love? Doesn't it make us happy that the stars are there to keep us pressed against the influence of our favorite spirits, their living or unliving whispers, their arrangements, our agreements, their flauntings, our aspirations, our ambition to take what we remember is ours, to keep it, to align the ecstasies, and sleep, finished, among the rains? What would it make us do if there is nothing, no one like us, near us, but us? How would it keep us from cowering and keep us courageous? Knowing there are others, as there are, if you believe, and if you're looking out at them, would still not allow you to shy from your fluttering, engaging, enlivening, overwhelming, overcoming, trembling pinnacle, your perfect chase, never caught, and not in one single eternity. It's always the same complement, compression, where the even opposition of colors in the tradition and tome of the darkness, in the knowledge and decree of the shade, makes black and white where the light might reveal brown, mixed and melded, compact, untrue to pigment, to prismatic, pure spectrum, dirt and earth. In the night their hair grows out, itches like roots spreading, acclimating to atmospheric conditions, reaching under the next new star over the bend, to be straight with it, to be planted into the light of its shells of rotating orbitals, planets cycling, dwindling down into moons of their own, a dragon's spine, spiraling into smoky, cresting blue and white clouds, to breathe fresh swallows of water from the muddy dirt, to come in the open air onto the ground and the sway of the honest wind, legs all dangling into the air, permeated with bright, young, cartoonish green and yellow, and the browns of their mushroom shoes, clipping out the branches, snapped off shears like toes, like genitals, appendages, bound legs wandering between the bowl if possible, and day comes. The devil wakes up, still standing, his still holier ghost lingering beside his body in the dust. Feels in the shifting ripple of the mirage the puking steam in his own heat wave abound that he'd never laid down for the night, just waited that morning should come, for any amount of scripture that it was gone. He holds his sword in front of him, both hands balanced in prayer, and grip about his chest, blades above the eye level, to sharpen the sight plane, to look across the secret of the glint. It rends what it sees, and he has not slumped, slackened, burned to sleep and settle except in mind, except in awareness, except even in flesh, in body. The way to place the severest sensation upon the Lord, the most unnatural, the best practiced destructive, dethroning, to give him the greatest suffering, was to abate. Be wise, worship with evil in the skin and pores, and bask in the warmth, and give him pleasure, glory. Why is our path to salvation, our gathering, so like the amassing of the armies of darkness for the war against God? You can sell your soul to that devil, if you meet him out on the unmarked crossroads, and always a call to the time, if you can make it that far, and not just call him demon before the challenge, but he also always writes in again to the termination of the contract that he never has to let you die, and he never may. You might crawl, busted and deformed, sick and empty, and gashed from the cold, black waters of the industries, a leap across a canyon, a drink from the poison at the gate, never in separate cups, the challenging across the table prepared for you at thine enemies over the pitted steel ladders and cornered cements of the city beach, agitating stings of cracked and cornered vertebrae, locked into place like the dangle of split shin bones, forearms, hobbling, limping, and the lick of smooth, bare gum just knocked clean from salivating teeth, rushed on your tongue, your swirling taste buds leaking with fluid of collapsed sinuses, a wall of smashed cavities, brain stented, bubbling, beating, face all burned over with oil and flying dust sears, compounded in layers of stabbing, sprayed glass, so sheared near the eyes awide, floods of organ fluid, deep, punctured, pleasant, warm tingles cupped in the last of your hands, spilling through seeps, entangling wounds, and you would heal the same, with or without the help of your kind, or the calm of the living storm outside, with the same recollection, with the same memories and purposes, missions and understandings, resources, flesh of the temple of self, built somehow curious, trudging always up, on, and out from the shifting or less shifting sands. Abound, intelligent, skilled and devious, pleasured, leisured, aching through a recovery so long that you'd also regenerate stilted, in permanent pain, the crutches of your initial defeated arrogance, your wallowing moans in those dripping, puddling alleys, bent and crooked in symmetrical, rebalanced body that you'd fall easier if wiser next time, and it would happen again, and again, and again. It would make you a different animal. In time, you are to be a different animal.
You may just be erased of that other nearby planet, as space is or is not or could be a pendulum, and the passage of infinite time as a skew of those who collect their traversing's as all influence between all of the also infinite and all present moments remaining. Their eyes chatter, one side of one cyclops mind trained, and shiver at the first sight of the all moment, quivering socket in the chiseled cheek, their brief touch with it in one life when it is the one vision you may take with you through every life you've ever had, or ever could have, and one punishment that it has always remained present to you, its nourishment and availability, and the torture is that it still may, in unpredictable beauty, as the promised solace, the ever comfort, the chance at return, and the unintentional disgrace, the overreaches, the underestimations, the ill-limiting experiences, uninvoked at any time you wish,
but never first, and innocent thereafter, cease. Evil does not know that it is evil, never knows it is evil, and is always aligned. There is no one. The devil stands at the desert, as the day rolls up, bright and wide, as though it never rested in shine, a spanning morning, and the babies are crawling everywhere. Every ounce you've taken past your awakening is to be recompensed when I tie you down and I get my hands on you this time. A hell for the master when he's been taught in an afterlife of the world of his enemies, the senseless killers, the heretical fools, the churners of the unknowing mass, screaming agony like still huffing exhaust and grinding asphalt, rock, grass, water, wood, trenches, and for the tortured bound there to be merciful, abiding, forgiving, and gentle from a life in the rain and snow, away from the blood and the fire, the warmth and the heat of heaven for its own kind, a light, to abuse to depth of emotion, rigor of allotments in death's line, chaos of desire for revenge, and how much you might overstep your injustices, numb with rage, how much you'd fall short of what you've deserved from the cowards in darkness when the Father again puts each of them in a row outside your chamber, into your power and black flowing magic upon arrival, upon taste of death as bitter as your grips to their pieces, your infliction, your imaginations of their forms, illusioned, altered in surgeries, present to unsoothed, unanesthetized, even popping, hot, pulsing nerves, semi-humans born billions of years into the many collapses and re-rises of fitting, functional, reflective civilizations. Silence on the plains of earth, the souls, few but expansive, telelectric hive minds, more spirit than body, representatives of whole races, made alive from the foulest, most pointless circles of hell, where the environment keeps the punishers suffering, rotting, decaying skin and flesh, as the sufferers themselves, and unreleased, laid out to view the universe, the night moon and stars, the full day and landscapes, the constellations and the magnifications of their elevated, coalesced, single, unmoving sense into the smaller workings of the distant marks, arranged, remembered, only viewed, allowed to pass on to another symbol of eternities of life, even through skips and new beginnings of death, the darkness to start life again, as it would be the one way for a soul to endure its entirety, unhindered by glory, the ability to see it. And closer to all of it from their standpoint, communicating their findings, the movements, the morals, the disappointments and climaxes on some sub-personal level, humming and moaning and singing in grumbles beneath the world's rumbling, layered, compacted, resonant abyss for those who are appointed to feel the severest pain in one life and severest pleasure in another's, the talent to encompass the entirety, or maybe the last future before the next, standing still with no understanding of why or how or who, rocketed across the colors of the unfamiliar celestials, within, outer, and beyond, up the gradient in young, honest, trusting eyes, again as sacrifice to the unaware, and then revealed, invigorated before insignificance, envisioned, enervated, if not willing, or in your penitence, your sinlessness, your communion with those that once took your territory. First to take your flesh, breeds of monkeys fabricating pleasures from the top, from the animal kingdom of God. He beckons you from him with purpose alone, just to take you from his house of all light, when God says, "It is never the sin itself that takes you from me, but you, the being who has shed wings, that were also too heavy on your bones to fly to my rescue." Our purpose, our one purpose in and for our ethereal brood, of our guttural promulgation, wasted down the chute of happy abominations, skews and senses, planing and pinching into fruitlessness, sterility, immaturity, closing at the eyes, the nose, the mouth, the ears, and pores, unadapted, mutated senses, cast off some seminal cliff and into some dusted, watchless, unobserved arena, with no influential, buzzing audience, ephemeral or powerless to its own reach, is to take us away from the Lord and make us more or once more into ourselves. They have sex to cast the seed into the wind, to mate upon itself like that, since we found the pleasure and many others of their types, for solace from the land of God's war, light burning light in inquisition, purging. If the thief relinquishes himself to and from the desert, then the beggar banishes forth and forthwith from the ice. They and you mate to make themselves, yourself, more like you are, as you are from the start. They mate and cast the seed to live again that way, or accident, barren of egg or ovum, instead living as always. The devil watches them come, crawling faster in the light, but as, and this he is sure, they are chittering over every crack and cornered crevice now, each one of them following their own path, all aligned in that mantra of aimlessness, irresponsibility in the name of all, unaccountable, blameless, eyes as black and as dripping of orbs as they can be. Full view, puritanical focus, blindness, direction, swirling inward, inherent to the spiral of this one world, this one swallowing dream, already prepared for its characters. Impure, ancient, and alike, for we are the core, and we are many, branches of its hurricane, ocean swell, ridge, oasis, levee, and divide, groveling, searching, touching, tasting, eating, following the mystical poultice swastikas imprinted in their minds. The square that moves like the circle, trailing, tailing, they have been multiplying since the night began. How is there a way to fear his goodness? If any of them look up, any one of their masses, without the key in their hand and their arms out, to dampen the monolith and trickle of the Father, who first stood in the light and could not hold us, their minds would crack at the immensity and the color of day beneath space, and take the harbor of the totems and altar of demons. Would you trip the Creator, throw him, cast him down, defeat him, see him defiled at your feet, and then seek to lift him, the great weight, the spirit growing strong under gauged shackles, as an aid, a caretaker, a relief of the burden, a fellow, an apostle, a disciple of your own sacrilege, your betrayal, a help in the time of need, of the weak, of the meek, and of the impoverished inherited? The earth is bare and frozen, and burnt with sopping ash, and so is given to those that would not touch, but tread scarce, and let its topsoils heal, be taken into its ruthless womb, a home and crag, a shelter of parasitic coma, protection, a shield from the next eternity, apocalyptic fire-laden or towering, trudging ice celestial in transgression. Be thrown from the red crack of thunder full around the illumination of your head, slapped belly down on a coiling, waving jaunt of clear crystal, melting magnified ice, a globular skyscraper jammed into the height and terrace like a bolt of lightning, a trail of energy. Flesh solidified under the concentration of the purple storm, imperfect, bowed, and tenuous, with a mission to hold yourself, your body, and all life as you know it, the dreaming unconsciousness of survival, to grip to its smoothing edges the head of its cone, dripping and draining to trickling, pooling water beneath, running down every direction, every span of surface, sinking, shrinking, shortening in slowest measure as your warmth shivers and shakes around its continual slipping, wicking the temperature out of your skin, your muscle, your congealed blood, aware of the fall, a tingle wilder than cold, and clean as you lose grasp on the degrading, unbalanced orb, swilling into its own stature, batting your hands out to palm with pressure against the far reach, the overcrown, the hanging facade and vertical separation of fizzling cool, and worshipping, releasing, ascending, levitating heat to steady yourself upon it at the tension of the whole fetal curl. The eyes down into the whole of its glass, flexing into the ranking rushes of freeze, leveling, to hold until the meditation, trespasses onto the unbearable, unbearing, conflicted, relinquished, and relegated to the vindication, defied the outshining, the atonement, or the homogenization or consonance, to clutch to the lifeless file until you succeed, rest through the breeze that singes your tender skin, until you sleep in pain to awake to the light, carried or coveted, and slump down, crawl, step, and drop into a world where the hallways and all the pathways are filled with liberating water up to the chest, to drive and glide and swim near and past and beside those in their unnoticing recreation, and break through the barrier to your own kind again, to breathe deep upon dissension from thinner reckonings and choking airs, beckonings fulfilled, caressed, braced with suspension, comfort, liquid, lubricated, floating in dispersion, fragile in the controlled medium, insulated with new solution from the shimmering, bubbling, babbling river of your own sowings, the bat of the black wings over the sky, behind, beneath, hidden under the tremendous shelter's coverings at the reaping. Watch the all-power at the final fair of himself, with no conviction left in his sin-stained cloak to free any influence eternal, where you are to be reborn, if you are evil, and across, facing the all-knowledge, at the final acceptance, the final rush of the final battle, the final pleasure, too resolute, too possible, too righteous, and too transcendent to stop. Without choice, infinite, where you'd be resurrected if you are good, but you must live. It is the same in repentance, that if you are good, you die, and if you are evil, you fall lower and farther apart. The devil's contract is so stricken through and scribbled, lined out and reinscribed with caveats, coercions, concessions, and fair, evaluated, and compromised agreements that no one can read it anymore. And the good Lord, in his unabiding, unbinding wisdom, came to illusion of the bending earth of the afterlife, and covered all the pages over in black, all the growths, the aggregates and textures, the skins and painted doors to the strongholds black, the walls and lookouts, the nests and markets in black, with no trace of a corner generating the implement, a point or pull, a stab or drag, no lapse of the coating, none but the entire scar of the white, or the colored dearest, and the people no longer look down, but evolve up to one eye on the stalk of the bones, the sclera pinching and bulbing at the neck, but not outward, straight up, the vision, the sight, the focus, the memory and mind, gazing in adaptive vertical, so that they cannot bear to stand staring into the ceilings any more for whole days of stagnation, and roof, limits, when they can walk out, maintain center, wobbling wide, and drift along those plains of the world's majestic currents, the magnificent fans of far-distant oceans and cliffs, mountains and spilling beaches, swelled below the present perception, reflected, aromatic, hinted, real and awaiting, as are all convergences of soul that are no longer lost but still yet to be found. Feeling for the obstacles or the impediments or shoulders of the relegated, sifted back, so vulnerable, peripheral, enlightenment that could sustain that they can no longer blink. They trust that the last of their mechanics would keep them up, functioning, teaching the machine to think, to feel, to emote, the silent possession, stilted, calculating the logarithmic numbers, numerals based on those beside them rather than on each themselves. And thus, on any determined base, defined, equated, in orders of code, digesting and fuming, devouring unattached and vented until the last sense is cut from the cord and let to balloon into the open levitation. The devil is the last one to remain looking forward to what comes, what has come, what may come, creases in the panoramic dimensions, gaps to lead to planes as thin and gleaming and as specific to opposing hue as oil slicked on water, as far from the highest heights of where he stands, if length enough of flat stretch on this tumbling earth to speed and catch flight, prepared if unenduring, enduring if unprepared, and it is as infinite to the height of our rise, when the Lord lifts our weights from our shoulders, as the tremendous, uncomprehended stability and settling and size above our head. And the devil remains also, listening aback, tasting the vibrating sounds and musics of the noble, interesting wind. Crossed of the roads and sold and left to caress the kingdom, behind to what has passed, the guidance, the instruction, the memory, prophetic, committed to the idea that he may stand in the culmination of his end. the prime and zenith of his life, and watch the flood, flow, and expiration of one full day in all its violences, in all its roars, washes, and selective celebrated settlings, auras of growing communion in observance, sabbatical, motionless. The idea that any horizontal diagonal from where he stands, from his stance, wayward from the picking tangent of the earth, the leveler, the parallel sample, excision, is as true to the airy dredge of the vertical lift of the hand as potential picked up by the scruff and sting of our necks, or the burying-eyed building of our own constructs as in the tasteful, specific direction heading out into space, if space is as black as it is vacuuming, as far away to praise and find God above, upward, and the path of open sky to the world of spirit, where we've fortified ourselves down into bastions, citadels of indoor self and self-worship, safety and civility, cures and mercies, broods and cultivations and voluming representations of core, before misguided resurrection to slow time to a crawl, to waft our soul into a gentle form, erect, untested, unchallenged in embattlements, protected where the free land makes our bodies crawl, shows us the wideness and flat rumble of the abyss at our hands, beneath us, expanded in compression, in minds to the light as the outer reaches are magnified in thinness, until he falters, alters the course, corrects, breaks from the rigid, eternal grip, the ride to mother, forever, always chasing the father as he devours her tail, swoops at the multiplicity of ill calculations, bends and spirals in loops out into nowhere, crushed, imploding, planetary, short of the sun or stars, or further, unseen, but senses shining in between, aimed from rebirth, neither into depths or up against the exponential trick of matrices. Higher intellect for lower, spherical reality, idle and unmoved by its beauties, its changes, its magnitudes, if he can just get the speed. He now hopes the emptiness moves to the front, gets to the light. He wonders if he's already lost the momentum that would wander him. As we are orbiting, as we are traveling, off to where his consciousness, his graced whole, his blessing and essence at the tip of the steeple, or the quadratic needle would carry perpetual. Say it to your friend. You could have been my most valued enemy. Heaven is filled with demons who sold their soul, unknowing to the Lord, for nothing but the smile on their faces, the joke divining in their hearts at the loss of the lost who couldn't see through the disguise, and what little there was left that can't be taken, the last of themselves for which they thought they were trading. He's here now. He's here. He gives me hellions at my feet, delighting at their own gore and innards and unhilted weapons, toppling with undiscerning mutilations, barbarous, clumsy, influxed, butchering, delimbing with God's bright above to hold my hands while I stomp with ease and bounce and supported lift reverberation to end the miseries. He gives me brothers to see deified on the misted mountains. He gives me daughters to throw to the beautiful, wondrous winds, like twirling leaves, never choosing, and like birds, falling more than flying, and like all animals, pure in their certain sin, leaping themselves off from any of their cliffs and balances, jumping back over their own heads, their own eyes, toward death for the adrenaline rush, the exhilaration and pleasure in killing themselves, suicidal, unsuccessful, immortal in their gasping autumn, testers and spottings of gentle laying, scouting, uncovering casts of what will be, beds for seed in the spring, off the arms of many who cycle in and work those same winds into their secrets, sects, and keepsakes and canopies, searched, explored, and revealed. As the horse runs pure in sin, the escape against the alternating compression of the chase, the freedom, impulse, and surprise versus the path, the resonance and the faith, the juicy green starvation of always shying from the repairing conflict of assuming self-guilt and yet finding roaming forests of shade without the screaming, cursing, embodied strikings of light, the hot, bloody pump of the legs across the road, always further to no man and no animal's land as it shows, as the night badger is pure in sin with lust, and breeding to breed upon the breeds, to love and lick the deformities and laziness from the sloths, curled in to fit each other less and less until they bathe in the same sex as their fluids, to hallucinate out from the ditches in the grounds, to project on their starry sky. The devil learns that this moment contains all moments. He asks, "Why can't I remain illuminated?" He understands and now believes that while there may be good and may be evil, the Lord created both of them. For something so often mistaken for the light, nothing but the light, and even the sharpest swallowing point of it, to burn permanent shadow, and he makes all well in that way, without or with health. If God is all, and all that is one, then he is good, and he is evil. When all the heads are separated, and the bodies of the babies are all stunned and wriggling, shivering across bent flexors, writhing, crooking fingers, mechanical joints, trying to rewire control to damaged parts of the attached body, stolen, built, and graced, snapping extremes of the appendages and laying postures, testing the unsynchronized limits, no longer crawling, stopped at their terminal travel, the devil wafts and spirals back to his center, at the clearing of the oasis, a desert as it would be a pond, a reflection of all facing civilizations, all worlds, all terraces, conglomerated in uninterrupted architecture, unabrupt, gone dry, a mirage as is more fitting for the indomitable, and the sun is back up to full high noon. There are no cries, just shakes on the ground that settle, rumbles of the generalized stoma that makes angels and animals, dinosaurs, monsters, dragons, trees, winds, stones atop mountains, and waterfalls shedding out in torrents, magics and materials all the same from habitat, lives effaced, glowing out alike. He stands and waits for the siesta to pass, the endless progressive Sabbath, and feels for the action of the universal wobble, senses that when the sun ticks and dips back down to that lining horizon, perpendicular, slicing the planet in half at the carve of the dust, to lift again before the fall passes, before a mute and clap of eternal trailing guidance where we watch the moon as bright and through the laden solid ground, behind our post, through our whole body of earth, behind our closed, sleeping, filtering eyelids, nodding, swaying, resisting, awake, it may rise again, returned, rebounded as a new day, and he hears the rustling of fingers on dust, scratching, scraping. His work developing from farther out now, chittering in toward the whispers of fresh, released spirits, attempted, uprooted, whispering debasements, illusions ethereal, devout, defiances for echoed deterrence, ensnared, hubric, and the tittering sweet coos of more of them, the hordes of children, forming out from the cracks, searching from them and their coverings, congenerations, congealing, corrected, and filing out, curious, careful, and tending further inward against the all-seeing providence. In the temple atop the leaf, the goddess with the pink eyes is drooping. She's telling them that the devil cannot stop, that she's seen it before. It is for her intuitive future. She can hear it now, hears it from her families above, on the balconies, that the spanned, greatest, holiest, barest, nearest light is embattled until it splays and sears infertile, in heavenous competition, crumbled into collectives, in companionment. She tells them that we've sought refuge before, in the Word, under the shadow of his wings, as so have many men, but if the black wings of the angel of death bat but once over the eyes of the sleepers, but once before they are wiped from the earth, forever, some may know that the taste of death is bitter, as it has passed, and some, those who face it, remember that his fruit is sweet, and shields us, when we are weak and in need, from the light, when God may as well be the great destroyer in the sky, and our protector, a caressing evil, be thou under whose wings we seek refuge again, to regress and shelter and cheat time, and strengthen and be saved from the darkness of fire and ice alike, until our idol leaves us. He flies, he hunts, he scouts and nests. The devil unbuckles his sword. This time, he decides he is not to harness it again. Not with the progeneration, the flooding unfinished, not without devoiding the plague, the festering. The angel of death, he knows, swoops like the slit of paper more than flesh, suspended, warped, mentored like that, thin as such, and he fears not the lapse and twirl and lash of mindlessness, the proprietor of the already unconscious, the most imperfect. He asks, "May I be forgiven?" Then, "Can I be forgiven?" And then, in the prayer of the most unclean, the farthest vanished, the lowest transgressor, "May 1,000 years pass today." And then, with, again, full desire of full belief, "May another 1,000 years pass tonight." In the temple atop the leaf, the first 1,000 years passes, and ends the lifetime of pleasure. And then, when the second 1,000 years passes, it ends the lifetime of suffering, brings them back to the start, in the same place that they were and are. The last day comes up, sharp as it is, and grinds down to a direct opening above their heads, a twist that blades and then slows, for those that are blind and bound to the difference, into a wheel unraveled at the whip of the god that snapped it. Sheared these quantums, channeled their power of energy more than mass, beat and flowered the bright, blossoming panes, a lay that rolls, entwined, back to the angle of a new turn, a switch of the hand, a release of the dominance into the churning terrains, a bump and cast of the next mark, ripe if undamaged, unbroken, and flayed porous instead of strapped, striped, flailed, and torn. And there the sun sits still to make them all the sacrifice, waits, beams, and uptakes from the very steam off their skin and out from the rot and meat and digestion of their pluming organs, abducts the outlaws and the pious alike. They wait for themselves to pass, more than any time, any condition, any influence, any state or disarray, present, and the devil's work continues.